Red Veil, a Cat Returns fanfiction by Yarning Chick. Read for you by the author. Haru wasn't sure why she had to visit the von Gickingen estate. She had confirmed for herself that the only person of interest to her hadn't been there for longer than she had been alive. But since finding that old photo and reading the von Gickingen family legend on their listings, she could think of nothing else but coming straight to the estate, by hook or by crook. It was useful that the family had turned part of the manor into a bed and breakfast as well as a private museum, since she wasn't certain that she'd have made it past the gate if she had rolled up to it in a taxi and tried to explain why she wanted entry. She took in a deep breath and exhaled before exiting the taxi after it slowed in front of the main entrance. An elderly butler smiled at her but blinked before frowning a little at the young lady. "Welcome to the von Gickingen estate, miss. My name is Leopold. I was assigned to tend to your every need." "We're trying to keep guests from inviting themselves into private family quarters," was added in Haru's mind. But she smiled all the same as she and the driver rescued her luggage from the back. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Leopold. I will try not to be a burden." He seemed to try to shake off some thought before grabbing her rolling luggage. "It is very unusual for only one person to book a room at the estate. I hope my presence will not inconvenience any other guests. I more or less plan to enjoy my stay as I am permitted," Haru assured him, trying to skirt around just why she had dumped her savings into booking a room at this lovely corner of heaven and actually traveling here. Leopold hummed, almost sneaking glances at her as he led the way up the modest stairs and into the grand hall. "May I presume you would like to rest before supper?" She nervously rubbed one arm but couldn't think she'd stand the tension of waiting any longer. "Is it too late in the day to go see the museum?" she asked hopefully. "I can rest afterward if there's time." He seemed puzzled by her request, but checked the grandfather clock before shaking his head. "I am afraid there is only 30 minutes left until we close down the museum for the night. By the time we dropped off your things and I brought you to it, the doors will already be locked." Haru couldn't hide her deep disappointment. "Stay calm. It means you're early for tomorrow's viewing." "Then resting before supper might be the best option. Dress attire, correct?" "Indeed," Leopold agreed before leading the way to her room. The Baron does try to provide a thorough experience for his guests, and with wedding season over, he will be paying extra attention to the fewer guests that remain in his hall. It was silly that dining in the same room as nobility had no effect on her nerves. Haru should have been ecstatic at the idea's aesthetic, but her thoughts were absorbed elsewhere. With Leopold a few steps ahead of her, she allowed herself a tiny pout as her heart raced at the idea of getting inside the museum. "I will probably have to take pills to get to sleep tonight, in spite of the jet lag." Haru double-checked herself in front of the body-length mirror in her little servant's room, wondering if she was currently over- or underdressed for the occasion while spritzing herself lightly with cherry blossom perfume. She should be fine, she decided with a nervous smile. This was England, and red was often associated with her heritage. No one should bat an eye at her cheapao, especially since she had avoided one with gold embroidery. She wanted to be presentable, not the belle of the ball. Trying not to worry about it, she twisted her hair up until she could pin it in place with a hairpin shaped like a black rose to complement the corded hem and closures of her dress, as well as the pleated underskirt peeking through the side slits. Since she wasn't one to worry about makeup, she settled for applying some lipstick in a shade just darker than her natural color and draped a sheer red shawl over her elbows. Her red nails seemed to catch the light, making her smile at the rare bit of pampering she had allowed herself for this trip. It was silly to doll herself up as much as she had. She hadn't put this much effort into dates she used to attempt, and she knew she wasn't going to see anyone that... Her back stiffened as the air seemed to breathe a sigh, making her wheel around to inspect the room. No one. Nothing. But her heart pounded in excitement. "Is it you?" she whispered hopefully. A breeze seemed to whisper against her cheek, making her flush with a dopey grin. "Maybe I won't have to wait until morning." She rushed for her luggage so that she could extract an envelope. "In case I disappear," was scrawled in careful English. Haru lovingly set the letter at an angle on the vanity to make it as easy to spot as possible. Perhaps she was being premature or even too optimistic, but at least no one would accuse her of leaving without a goodbye. A gentle knock tapped at her door. "Miss Haru?" Leopold called. "Coming," Haru answered, grabbing a small red clutch and her room key from the vanity before running to the door, praying that the red color in her cheeks would not be noticeable. She opened the door, but there was no mistaking Leopold's first impression of her. He inhaled sharply as his eyes turned wide. The man even took 2 steps away from the door. Haru frowned, since she had already seen for herself that there was nothing on her face or person to warrant their reaction. "Am I not dressed appropriately?" she asked while raising an eyebrow. His mustached mouth tried to answer, but no sound could escape as he struggled to nod his head. Choosing to interpret that as her attire was fine, Haru closed the door after her and locked it tight before dropping the key in her little purse. "Then shall we?" she asked politely. Leopold was still struggling to speak, and his skin looked surprisingly waxy as he gestured with one hand for her to follow him. But unlike when guiding her to her room, the butler seemed unusually interested in walking only a half step in front of her so that he could continue to stare from the corner of his eye. Haru frowned a little. "I tried to pick a dress as normal to this country while still being comfortable to me," she informed him. "I'm certain you've seen more outlandish outfits than mine." That made him flinch guiltily, but at least it was enough to shake his vocal cords into working. No, your dress is respectable," he nearly forced himself to say, still not completely taking his eyes off her. "I wasn't expecting to see it tonight, that's all." Haru was baffled at such a flimsy non-explanation. "So was the last person you saw in a red cheapao a troublemaker?" "Absolutely not," he insisted vehemently before catching himself. "Well, at least not on purpose." Haru hummed, thinking she now knew why he was so nervous. "I will explain to the Baron if he is troubled as well that all the other clothes I brought were not as nice as this." Leopold stared at her almost desperately, as if he had no idea of how to respond to such a simple but respectable reply. Taking in a deep breath, he doubled their pace, now looking straight ahead as Haru had to struggle to keep up. "He's flying off the handle for no reason," she told herself as her heart kept racing at the minimal proof she'd felt in her room. The Baron would need to be careful with reasonable guests if he wants continued additional income. A little before reaching the tall oak doors, Leopold suddenly stopped and held a hand out to stop Haru when she caught up to him a few seconds later. "If you would kindly wait here while I inform the Baron of you," he asked, trying not to sound like he was begging her. Haru stared at him while catching her breath. Is this standard procedure? But since it made no difference to her, she nodded her approval while using one hand to quickly check her hair. Leopold gave her such a grateful look that it confused her further as he carefully opened the door just enough to slip through, as if he wanted to hide her as long as possible. Haru frowned. She'd gone out of her way to make herself as plainly presentable as possible, and he was acting like she had dressed up like a killer clown. Is there a local superstition about women that wear red? If it was this big of a deal, you'd think they'd put right in the website or booking process to avoid the color if possible. Leopold was gone for about a minute before she heard lighter feet race up to the door and open it enough to slide a body through. It was a middle-aged man with dark hair and eyes, staring at her as if he'd never seen a woman before. Since she recognized his family picture from the website, Haru bowed respectfully. "My lord," she stated cordially. He didn't say a word, still staring at her until she shifted uncomfortably. "I apologize if my attire is making you uneasy, but my other clothes are a lot more casual, and I did try to obey your rules." The Baron Toto von Gigan struggled to shake himself back into speech, even as his wife poked her head through the crack to gape at her as well. "It's not... well... I can't do this," he gave up, stepping to the side so that his wife could join them and close the door after them. "Who are you?" he asked directly. She blinked. "Haru Yoshioka, my lord. Am I in trouble?" The Baron and Baroness exchanged a worried look. "May we ask why you chose to stay at our home instead of somewhere in London?" Baroness Tara von Gickingen tried. Haru's face immediately flamed against her will. "London's too big and busy for my taste. But of your home I've been permitted to see, it suits me very well. It looks very peaceful," she added without thinking it over, unable to keep the wistfulness out of her tone. The couple shared a worried glance again before the Baron tried again. "But was there anything that marked our home above any other place? I understand that you are from Japan, and that seems like a long distance to take by yourself for only a few days' stay." He wasn't wrong. That was exactly why Hiromi had tried to talk her out of it, or at least waiting until after she got back from her honeymoon with Tsuge. But she couldn't wait. She took in a deep breath, wondering if she was about to be forcefully chucked into an asylum if her words weren't perfect. "I found the legend about your great-great-uncle while surfing the internet. I haven't been able to get it out of my head, so I came in the morbid hope of finding out more about his sad story." Despite already being fairly pale, the pair nearly turned translucent at the news before looking at each other, as if hoping the other one would have some answers to her bizarre wish. A distant moaning of the wind began echoing down a side hall that was not too far from the three. "Oh, all right," the Baron snapped irrationally before giving an almost desperate look to his guest. "If you are not hungry, I can tell and show you more than you would find even in the museum." Haru brightened happily. Who needs food? She couldn't resist joking, feeling ready to jump out of her skin from excitement. "But be warned, you won't be able to unlearn anything you find out," the Lord reminded her. But she nodded while trying not to be obvious about inching her way toward the side hall the moaning was still coming from. Haru hated that she had to maintain enough self-control not to run ahead of the pair as they led her down the side hall, up a narrow set of stairs that passed into the third story, and down another hallway that smelled differently than below. There were heavy doors in between both ends of the stairs, so this was clearly not a regular tour. "I've heard a lot of stories about my Uncle Humbert," the Lord said softly as they approached yet another door for him to unlock. "How kind he was. How bright he was. How unpredictable he could be when the mood set upon him. You know, there was talk that he preferred men from how outlandish his escape methods could turn when girls tried to gain his favor. Maybe if they had tried treating him like a person instead of a breeding stud, he would have found someone he liked." Haru couldn't resist muttering under her breath. That cool wind seemed to kiss her cheek in response. The Baroness whipped around in shock in time to see her guest's small, content smile at the strange gesture. "Did you find his journals?" she asked suspiciously. "Why would I need to?" Haru asked with a shrug. "I've seen his portrait on the internet, and he chose madness over a woman of flesh and blood when he was brilliant in all other respects. He clearly wanted a wife, just one to his liking." The wind almost seemed to wrap around her specifically, as if attempting to recreate an embrace. The Lord and Lady looked at each other, as if she had told them a terrifying ghost story instead of attempting the other way around. The Baron shook his head before pocketing the key and opening the door. "In any case, you are correct. Uncle wanted someone warm, sincere, and considerate. He heard a passing myth that if you approached a mirror at the bottom of the stairs while approaching it from the top at midnight on All Hallows' Eve, you would see the face of your true love. And he was desperate enough to try it in hopes of recognizing the lady in question and being done with it." He nervously stepped to the side and extended a hand for her to enter first. Suffice it to say, he was convinced the rest of his tragically short life that he saw her. Her heart pounding in her ears, Haru didn't hesitate to step into the room and pat a wall until finding a light switch, recognizing it as a study that had long been a memorial for that same uncle since there was a handful of portraits of him. But a grand majority of the portraits surrounding her were not of the man, but of herself. Most of them were charcoal on paper, protected by glass to withstand the ravages of time. The largest and most prominent of the portraits was an oil painting, looking exactly how she'd last seen herself in the mirror just a few minutes before. Haru immediately burst into a large grin at the sight before giggling. "So this is why Leopold stared at me like that." She took in a long, cleansing breath as most of her stress left her body. She turned around to smile brightly at the Baron and Baroness, who were clearly spooked that she was not. I guess I don't have to be shy about why I picked this place anymore. She gave a loving glance to the closest of Baron Humbert von Gigen's portraits. He's been in my dreams, too, for the last 6 months. The same amount of time before the illness took him in his sleep. The Baroness shook her head, as if she truly couldn't believe what was right in front of her. This is impossible. I mean, how could the pair of you share dreams when your timelines didn't match up? Haru held up her hands in a classic gesture of confusion. Your guess is as good as mine, but we would have probably figured it out sooner if we weren't both mute in those dreams. Then her silly smile faded at how different their timelines had been. But you can imagine how disappointed I was, finding out I was too late before I was even born. I was actually scanning photos on the internet to try making a digital remake of his face when I managed to run across the real deal, since I can barely draw stick people. The Baron stared at her before giving a glance to his wife. So what are you really doing here, if you know it's too late to be with my uncle? Haru found a footstool to sit on. You won't like it. I'm certain it's illegal and wouldn't be recognized in any case, but my plan was to help him find some peace in the afterlife, since he's resting uneasily enough for you and I to recognize his touch. The Baroness started worriedly. You had better not be planning to kill yourself, young lady, she sharply demanded, revealing herself as a mother even without the family portrait. Haru held her hands up in innocence and surprise. And sign myself up for an eternity of him scolding me about hurting myself for him when I know full well he'll love me just as much as an old woman or whenever I naturally die? No, thanks. She frowned as she felt a hint of cold on her nose, as if an invisible finger had tapped her to say, and don't forget it. The Baron immediately relaxed. Oh, thank heaven. I disapprove of suicide as a general rule, but much more so while on my property and completely avoidable. What is your plan, then? Haru nibbled on her lower lip before answering. He's resting uneasily because he didn't get a chance to marry his sweetheart. Have you heard of ghost marriages? They're well known in my culture. The Baroness looked both baffled and disgusted. You want to marry a dead man? I was planning on asking him first. Haru defended herself before smiling at her husband, who looked like he was going to be sick. But I don't expect the marriage to be legally recognized, and you and your family will have no obligation to me afterward if you choose not to. But I want the chance to give both Humbert and I one moment that we can never fully get back. She opened her little purse and took out a tiny scrap of paper before holding it loose in her palm. Humbert, blow this off my hand if you want this as well. Almost before the sentence was over, the paper was seemingly knocked out of her hand by an errant breeze that hadn't been present in the room before. Haru couldn't resist blushing at his clear acceptance before looking up at the Baron. Will you please show me to his final resting place? Haru had no idea why the tears came once the tombstone was in front of her. She knew he was dead, and, frankly, dead long enough to be her great-grandfather. But looking at a name she now knew was his, and seeing the physical years that had separated them, a hot disappointment filled her stomach. This just isn't fair, she whispered, sinking to her knees in front of his grave. Toto and Tara stood to the side as if they didn't know what to do. Which they likely didn't, since ghost marriages were not a part of their culture. As it was, Haru wasn't certain how faithful she had to be to the old ways for it to count for her beloved. She stared longer at the old stone, wishing that something could have happened for them to have had a chance. Found a time portal, managed to stay asleep, just something. 6 months of dreams didn't feel anything close to enough. But at least it was dark enough to do their business without attracting attention from any other guests or even servants that probably knew the story. Haru steeled herself before wiping and blowing her face clean with a handkerchief and digging through her purse for a tiny spade. Wait, the Baron tried to protest. Just a little cut, Haru stated sadly, digging it into the sod enough to pull up a little bit of the grass. "We never got the chance to properly love and honor each other in life," she began, feeling around her purse again until finding the 2 rings, tied together with a red ribbon so that she wouldn't have to hunt around in the dark. She really had been worried before about making this as quick as possible to keep anyone from stopping her. "We could adore from farther than either of us ever suspected, with the hope that maybe we would be able to find each other one day." At least it was easy to tell which ring was her father's. She pulled it free from the ribbon, slipping the token into the little cut of sod and pressing it back down in hopes that it would look as normal as before. There was a small bump, but nothing that wouldn't be fixed by the turn of a few seasons. She slipped on her mother's ring, feeling a bit relieved that Naoko wasn't around to tell her she was being foolish for wasting her parents' rings on a marriage that would never be real. She stood to her feet, leaving the spade on the ground for now before pulling out a paper fan that matched her outfit. She unfurled to its normal round shape and held it in front of her face, feeling self-conscious about doing this by herself, let alone in front of an audience that had never seen this before. "Once to the heavens and earth," she stated sadly, bowing in the direction of where the sun had long disappeared. "Once to the elders of my husband's family," she continued, bowing to the Baron and Baroness, who looked startled at being included, though her original plan had been to bow in the direction of the manor when she thought she'd have to sneak to do this. "And once to each other," she finished, bowing to the grave while fighting back tears. "I don't think I'll ever feel this way for any other man. I will wait as long as I have to until we are together, never again to be parted." This had been another reason she had only applied lipstick. Even waterproof mascara would have had trouble staying in place with the flood that flowed over her cheeks. Tara braced her shoulders, hugging her gently after what felt like only a few seconds. "Come along. If there's nothing else to be done tonight, you will need your rest for the morning." Haru desperately wanted to ask if she could have spent the night next to his grave. She was denied a wedding night, the least she could have had was staying close to him, spending the night talking to his gravestone about all the things she had been dying to say when their dreams had made speech impossible. But from the way Toto was positioning himself on the other side, Haru knew there was no point in asking for more. This much had already been near their breaking point. "I think you're in one of the smaller rooms," Toto stated thoughtfully. "I think I'd feel better if you were put in one of the family rooms instead. The one close to the garden should be pleasant." "The room's fine," Haru mumbled, since she wasn't exactly concerned about her living accommodations when she desperately wanted to turn right back to the grave. She glanced back longingly, but didn't fight the ones guiding her. "That wouldn't be right. After all, you're family now," Tara stated with a half-smile, as if she wasn't certain whether or not it was a joke. Since they had already made up their minds, Haru didn't see the point of arguing when her modest amount of luggage was swiftly taken to a room she used to fantasize about having since her Jane Austen phase. Haru brushed her hair in front of the bigger and fancier vanity than the one she had prepared her marriage in front of, now in comfortable flannel pajamas. She couldn't help feeling cheated that nothing supernatural had happened when she had performed the marriage ceremony the best she could by herself. It wasn't that she was expecting a thunderstorm or lightning when she claimed the late Baron for her own, but it would have been nice to get some little sign that she had done right, that some part of her Baron was now tied to her even more tightly than their intertwined dreams. 6 months, she mumbled, setting the brush aside and stretching through a yawn. That was how long both of them had been dreaming of each other. That had been why she had snuck off instead of waiting for Hiromi, though she'd be sure to pay for that when she got back to Japan. Would she still dream of him? Would they be able to speak now that she had gone through the ceremony? She had some Chinese blood, so it wasn't that outlandish for her to have used that method. But now the jet lag was catching up to her. Now that her business was concluded, all that would be left is the awkward next morning talk with Toto and Tara introducing her as a new aunt to their children over breakfast. Haru snuggled into the covers, secretly glad that she had skipped out on dinner. She was too miserable to be hungry anyway. The first thing her beloved did when she entered their dream world of mist and hills was spin her over his head before pressing a fervent kiss against her lips that felt all too real. Haru sunk into that kiss while wrapping her arms around his neck, wishing that they had been able to do this in the flesh. That continued for a while, and even when it stopped, her Baron acted like it was still an act of willpower to pull away enough to finally speak. "It's time, my Haru." She blinked. "Already? I swear I didn't do anything to myself." "I know," he assured her, his green eyes streaming as he looked at nothing but her and as reluctant as ever to let her go. "But it's time, all the same." Haru tried to peer through the mist, as if looking for the fancy room or her own corpse. "And I thought my best friend would be angry with me before," she muttered under her breath. But he still held her tight. "Toto and Tara will explain what neither of us could." He couldn't resist kissing her again. Haru had no choice but to melt into that kiss, feeling both sorrow at the life she was leaving behind, but happy that now nothing could come between her and her lord. Baron forced himself to stop long enough to finish his thought. "I know this will upset them as well, but a part of them will understand." Haru nodded in a daze. "And I did write goodbye letters, just in case." "That's more than I knew to do," he assured her, still smiling like he couldn't believe his luck. "Come along, my sweet wife. Our parents are waiting."